My name is Matt, and I have spent the last 2 days exploring all over the Columbia River Gorge and the surrounding area. In this video, I just want to share with you my personal top 10 favorite things that I did and that I saw. I'm going to cover a bigger variety of list that you probably haven't seen out there before, and I'll talk about some more waterfalls as we go as well. Okay, so obviously Multnomah Falls is like the main waterfall in the Columbia River Gorge. You have to see Multnomah Falls. They do require a parking reservation between 9 and 6. It's like the second tallest yearly flowing waterfall in the United States or something like that. Really gorgeous and just kind of elegant, just drops straight down, and then it has a second drop. Multnomah Falls is probably the fall that you're familiar with if you're watching this video, but there are several others that were fantastic, like La Tourelle Falls, there's Bridalveil Falls and Horsetail Falls and Joaquina Falls and several other just fantastic waterfalls. And the great thing about this is most of these are just roadside waterfalls. Like, you don't have to be a big hiker to go see these falls. You just pretty much pull off to the side of the road, and a lot of them you can actually just see from the road. Some of them require just a short walk to viewpoint, but really easy, accessible, and great to see the waterfalls. But there were a lot more things that I actually discovered as I explored. So the next thing is great viewpoints. So the highest viewpoint in the gorge that you can drive to is a viewpoint called Portland Women's Forum Monument. Basically, this group from Portland, the Women's Forum, back in the 50s, really worked hard to preserve the Columbia River Gorge. They actually had some land there somehow, and they donated it to the state, I believe. They actually made a monument there and turned it into a viewpoint. But there are several other viewpoints that you can get to. So one of them I got to by hiking, which was a pretty cool one at the top of Multnomah Falls. It's kind of a butt kicker of a hike. But when you get up there, you are right at the top, at the brink of Multnomah Falls as it drops off the ledge, and it is just such a sheer drop. It kind of takes your breath away as you walk up to it. That was a pretty cool viewpoint. I saw several others where you see the Columbia River, and then you can see the freeway, I-84, and then you can see the train tracks. So it's kind of cool, like having the train come through there. Several great viewpoints that you'll get to, most of them just pretty easily by driving or short walks. Okay, now the next thing is the lodges. Okay, so Multnomah Falls has a lodge. I believe it was constructed by the city of Portland, and then they donated it to the United States in like the 40s, and now it's run by the Forest Service. And you can't stay there, but it's a pretty cool lodge that's right next to the falls, and you can eat. They have some fine dining there. They have a snack shop, gift shop, a little exhibit or kind of a visitor center type of a thing, restrooms and stuff like that. And then another lodge that I visited is the Timberline Lodge. Now this is up on Mount Hood, so this is all in kind of the same area. It's like in a triangle. And Timberline Lodge was fantastic. In fact, this is one of my favorite lodges I've ever been to, and I've been to several as I've been exploring the national parks, and this was fantastic. Like when you walk into it, like in the basement, it feels like a dungeon, and you kind of go down this hallway, and then suddenly you're in this bar, the Blue Ox Bar. It kind of feels like a hidden little bar in the dungeon, which is cool. That was a really neat lodge. And fun fact, that lodge is in the movie The Shining. They used the exterior for the shots in The Shining. Everybody thinks it's the Stanley Hotel because that's what inspired The Shining, but when it came time to make the movie, they actually used the Timberline Lodge as the exterior. Okay, now the next thing on my list is the Columbia River. So the Columbia River Gorge, you know, it borders the Columbia River. The Columbia River is the river that Lewis and Clark followed all the way to the ocean. And there are several Lewis and Clark signs that you'll see as you travel along that river. Unfortunately, I believe most of the sites today are buried under, there's dams along the river, and so they've kind of covered up a lot of the Lewis and Clark sites or places that they stayed at. But the river is beautiful, and it's really wide and large, and there's actually some things that you can do there. But if you go over to the town of Hood River, you can go down to the marina, and you can actually play in the beach. And then the town of Cascade Locks has a steamboat cruiser. It's called the Stern Wheeler, and this was a historic steamboat that they had back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It's actually a replica of the one that they had out on the river back then, and so they rebuilt this, I think, in the 80s. And a really popular thing to do is to ride that along the Columbia River, so you have views of both sides of the gorge there. Okay, the next thing on my list is Historic Highway 30. So something to understand real quick, as you drive through the Columbia River Gorge and you're trying to look at all the waterfalls and stuff, there are actually two roads that go along that area. So the original road is Historic Highway 30, which I think was like one of the first scenic byways in the country. It's narrow and it meanders along and takes you to all the waterfalls. The other road is I-84. So I-84 got built, during the freeway era there in the 1950s and 60s after World War II. And it actually replaced parts of Highway 30 as it went through. Today, they're actually trying to restore a lot of the parts that it replaced and turn those parts into biking paths and hiking paths. But there is still a main part of Highway 30 that gets you to all the waterfalls. And it's actually really cool because as you drive along, you see these railings off to the side that are stone. And I just thought that was cool. Highway 30, like all the signs that you'll see as you go through the waterfalls and stuff, they're all kind of talking about historic Highway 30. One guy, he had to build a tunnel through the rock because he couldn't get access from the railroad to go around the rock. So he plowed a tunnel through the rock. Later, they ended up bypassing that and taking it around and they filled in the tunnel. But today, they've taken out the rubble of the tunnel and turned it back into a walking tunnel. In Cascade Locks, there's something called the Bridge of the Gods, and it bypasses the Columbia River or crosses over the Columbia River. The bridges are kind of a thing around here. I prepared an itinerary to help you visit the Columbia River Gorge, and it works if you only have a few hours or even a couple of days to explore. You can also pick it up as part of a larger Pacific Northwest bundle. Check out our website at we'reintherockies.com to see if it's a good fit for you. Okay, something else I enjoyed was driving the Fruit Loop. So kind of at the end of the gorge is a town called Hood River, Oregon. There is Highway 35 and it actually heads up towards Mount Hood. And that is actually part of the Fruit Loop. So as you go up there, there's all these fruit orchards just lining the road. And I stopped at a place called Draper Girls and they had a little store there with treats and goodies. The place was really cool. You could buy fruit. They have You Pick It farms, where you just go pick your own fruit. They have a bunch of treats that you can buy. And then also just the farms had these gorgeous flowers. Now, my father-in-law is a fruit grower. He has an orchard and his father had a massive orchard. So he's so into fruit and I was quite bummed out actually that I couldn't bring him here with me to see that. But I just absolutely love this area and it's a really beautiful area. In fact, that gets me to my next thing that I really enjoyed, which is the flowers of the area. So there's a bunch of wildflowers on the trails. As you're walking around, as you're driving around, you'll see a lot of wildflowers and those are fantastic. But then as you go through the Fruit Loop, some of the farms and orchards and stuff have these manicured gardens that are just so pretty. So like Draper Girls had a really, really gorgeous back garden there where you could see the flowers of Mount Hood in the background. So I really like that. And I think that's kind of a special thing about the Pacific Northwest, just from my limited observation so far, is just that you do have the wildflowers growing all over the place. Okay, next up is Mount Hood. Mount Hood is the tallest peak in Oregon. So I mentioned, the Fruit Loop kind of heads towards Mount Hood. It provides you some really good views of that. Well, you can actually drive all the way around Mount Hood. And in fact, you can drive up to it at the Timberline Lodge, which also has a chairlift called the Magic Mile Chairlift. Anyway, Mount Hood is the only year-round ski resort in the country is on Mount Hood. Kind of crazy. And it was like there were skiers up there when I was up there checking it out. The interesting thing about Mount Hood is you cannot see it from the Columbia River Gorge because you're kind of down in the gorge, so you can't actually see up to Mount Hood. You're gonna have to drive up on the Scenic Byway to get views of Mount Hood, and then again you can actually wrap all the way around it. So I liked Mount Hood. Of course I like mountains. That was cool to have like the river, the waterfalls in the gorge, and then to be able to get up high on Mount Hood. In fact, my ears were popping because you're going from almost sea level up to like 6,000 or 7,000 feet. Just like that. Okay, now I'm filming a couple of other videos about my experience and what I learned at the Columbia River Gorge. So I'll put those off to the side here. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, go west, young traveler.